A supplement to a 2012 Memorandum of Understanding regarding financial commitments to address the funding gap for the Peninsula Corridor Electrification Project.
Supervisor Cohen.
Thank you. So I think it goes without saying that electrification is incredibly important. The electrification of Caltran and California High-Speed Rail are a priority for all of us. And to ensure that we've got the strongest oversight protocols in place, I'd like to make some suggestions that we modified in a responsible way the item that's before us. Colleagues, I have two minor amendments that have been distributed to you. Both of them are on page 4. I will read them into the record. First, I'd like to remove the first whereas clause, lines 3 through 7, completely, which reference the Second Amendment in the final resolve clause, which is found in lines 20 through 21, which removes the second half of the sentence referencing the specific oversight protocols. This will allow these negotiations to move forward, protocols to continue to move forward. This is a simple and straightforward amendment. Jillian Gillette is here if there are questions that you may have from the mayor's office. We've got representatives from the TA as well as the Caltrain staff all here should there be any questions, but I think this is pretty straightforward, and this is incredibly important that we maintain the protocols so that we have the oversight needed. Thank you.
Thank you. Supervisor Cohen has made a motion to amend. Is there a second? Seconded by Supervisor Marr. Colleagues, can we take this without objection? Without objection, the amendments pass unanimously. Supervisor Peskin.
Thank you, Madam President. I was not aware of these amendments, and I'm happy to discuss them. I was going to rise to speak to the larger issue that is before us, which is that a project that originally was envisioned to be $1.5 billion has grown to $2.2 billion, and the city's share of that has grown from $60 million to $80 million. There is no question that this is an invaluable project. There's no question that we should electrify Caltrain, but the fact is that of that $20 million additional dollars, we have only identified $4 million of that, and $16 million remains to be identified. Insofar as we are in receipt of a letter from our esteemed Congresswoman Jackie Speer, and insofar as I've had conversations with her legislative staff, Brian Perkins, with regard to the fact that this is all predicated on a full funding grant agreement from the United States of America, I was prepared to vote for this. However, I would like to ask Ms. Gillette what the implications of removing the oversight protocol regimen from this resolution are. It is very clear to me that we as a city, and a few of us will be on this board after January the 8th, are going to have to find that $16.1 million, Madam President. So I would like to know that we actually have a mechanism to do that, assuming that the United States approves the full funding grant agreement. And with that, I would defer my question to Ms. Gillette.
Ms. Gillette.
Jillian Gillette, Mayor's Office. Thank you for the question. The implication of severing the protocol is to allow...
Can you speak into the microphone, please?
The implication of severing the protocol is to allow the city to take further administrative review of the protocol to make sure that it's adequate and sufficient.
Sorry?
I'm sorry, Ms. Gillette. A few members of the board could not hear you. Can you repeat that and speak directly into the microphone?
Yes, Supervisor, my apologies. The implications of severing the protocol are to allow the city extra time for administrative review to amplify and review and potentially beef up the protocol so that it's adequate for review of this project.
Thank you. Supervisor Peskin?
Thank you, Madam President. So what in the protocol is not sufficient? When would the protocol be achieved, and why should we vote for this before the protocol is in place?
Supervisor, in order to accommodate Caltrain's schedule, several of the agencies that normally would review a protocol like this have not yet reviewed it, so I don't know the technical answer to that question because it's pending additional review, which has not yet happened.
So relative to my follow-up question, which is why should we approve this resolution before that protocol is in place?
Well, if I may, I would defer to Caltrain staff, which has an answer for that question.
Hi, Casey Fromson with Caltrain. We discussed the oversight protocol with all of our funding partners before we moved forward with a 7-party MOU. So in May of this year, Caltrain took the first step to approve the 7-party MOU based on our knowledge that the oversight provisions were adequate with our partners. So we've been working with our partners since that time. We also saw the amendments today, and we feel very important that the MOU needs to move forward today. Part of the commitment and the timing on this is that the bids for the project expire by the end of the month. The other funding partners have already taken action on this, all of them unanimously, and High Speed Rail is the last one that's scheduled to go next week. So we're happy to take questions, but we feel like we've been working on this for a while, and we'd appreciate your timely vote today because it's important to move the project forward.
So through the President to the representative from Caltrain, I appreciate the fact that there are 7 parties to this agreement. I don't want to hold it up, but respectfully, you haven't really answered the question as to, number one, why the protocol is being removed from the resolution that is in front of us, and number two, what is the negotiation that is taking place relative to the protocol? Look, we're signing a blank check here, granted, to Mr. Perkins and Congresswoman Spear that this is all predicated on a full funding grant agreement. But insofar as this body and this city is going to have to come up with $16.1 million that we have not identified on top of the $60 million that we've already committed, I think that, respectfully, you owe the legislative branch of government an explanation, and maybe, Mr. Perkins, if you feel that you can answer this, and I don't want to delay this, but I also want to go in this with our eyes wide open that we're committing ourselves to a blank check for $16 million that we have not identified, and I don't understand, and I don't think any of the members, and I don't want to put words in all of your mouths, understand what exactly, why we're removing the protocol, how it's going to change, when it's going to change by, and what it means.
Thank you. Supervisor Peskin, is there any response?
Yes, I would like to say it is being removed at the request not of Caltrain, and so I will have to defer to others of why this one's being removed. And we, we're finding out about this around the same time you are, and so we feel. Oh, would you like to jump in? Yeah, and I would also like to defer to the San Francisco TA, who's also been a part of this process as one of our other San Francisco funding partners.
And before you speak, I'm going to recognize Supervisor Wiener to respond.
Thank you very much. So through the President to Supervisor Peskin, the reason this is being removed and will then be replaced by a stronger and better protocol is we don't believe that this protocol is adequate. And so we have been discussing how can we have better oversight. We saw with the recent situation with the Trans-Bay Joint Powers Authority that the city stepped in with greater oversight and then with even greater oversight because we ended up having to backfill a significant chunk of change because that oversight hadn't existed earlier, and we had no reason to do it earlier because that's an independent entity, but the city stepped in. We want to have that oversight now, and normally we might punt this until after the break to put it in, but there is a significant timing issue here that if we don't approve this, there could be ramifications with the federal funding, and particularly since by the end of this year, who knows what's going to be happening in Washington, D.C. And so even though I agree ideally we would replace this with the new, updated, better, beefed up protocol, as Congresswoman Spear points out in her letter, time is of the essence here in terms of getting this passed. And passing it with the existing language on what we believe is not an adequate oversight protocol would actually, we think, be even more problematic because it would connote that we are agreeing to what we believe is inadequate oversight. So it is our view that we need to put better oversight in, and that is the plan. So it's not the ideal or perfect situation, but we think it's the best situation or the best approach under the circumstances.
So, Supervisor Peskin, would you like to respond?
So, Madam President, I really appreciate Supervisor Wiener's very candid, transparent answer to it. It raises the question as to why we are entering into and becoming a party to a 7-party agreement when there is a trailing agreement that has yet to happen. I heed the admonition of Congresswoman Spear that time is of the essence. There is no question that the Obama administration is committed to this project. There is no question that we would like to get the full funding grant agreement in place prior to the end of the Obama administration, although I have every confidence that the Clinton administration will continue to honor that commitment. But having said that, the question becomes, insofar as high-speed rail follows us, what would the difference be, and what is the timeline around the protocol? And insofar as it is highly likely that we will have a special board meeting next week, I don't know where the protocol negotiations are. My inclination would be to continue this to our special board meeting next week and have the protocol in place with those additional protections that San Francisco is rightfully seeking.
And
Supervisor Wiener.
thank you. Through the chair, I would defer to our County Transportation Authority and to the mayor's office about, I don't know if 1 week is enough time to do that. I mean, we do have a template in terms of what we're doing with the TJPA, but I don't know if it would be identical to that. And so I would defer to our mayor's office and our County Transportation Authority to respond to that timing question.
And I will, in response, Madam President, to Supervisor Wiener, as the sole dissenting member of this body who was unwilling to bail the TJPA out with $250 million of commercial paper, say that I do not want to be in the same situation going forward as it relates to Caltrain. So I'd like to proceed carefully. I'm doing this because we have a fiduciary duty to the people of the city and county of San Francisco. And if it's not going to happen by next week, is it going to happen by September 6th when we reconvene after our summer recess? I mean, these are the time frame questions that I think we have the responsibility to ask as members of this body.
Ms. Gillette.
Supervisor, in response to the question about could a week suffice to do additional review, I would have to defer to the Controller's Office, since it's the Controller's Office that really led the analysis in the instance of the TJPA and put those protocols in place. And if the Controller's Office has bandwidth in the next week to provide that level of review. Question.
One second. Can you repeat yourself?
Sure. Todd Riekstrom, Controller's Office. We'd be happy to work with the department in the coming days and provide that assistance as well.
Supervisor Wiener,
I'm not sure that answered the question.
It doesn't answer the question, but I have other colleagues on the roster who want to speak on this item, so I'm going to call on them. And if we can have a straight answer from a specific department, that would be helpful. Supervisor Campos.
Thank you, Madam President. Both Supervisor Wiener and I serve on MTC, so we know the importance of this project of the electrification in terms of making high-speed rail a reality. So I'm definitely very interested in moving this forward. I have to say, though, that even though I was prepared to support this, the more I hear about where we are, the more problematic this is. I think that it is correct to make sure that if we're not satisfied with the adequacy of the oversight that's included in the protocols, that we should not be supporting something that we believe is inadequate. Likewise, though, what we would be doing by not including this in there is like there would be no oversight required to begin with. So if the protocol is important, and if the mayor's office is saying there is inadequate oversight, I don't see how the mayor's office can come here and ask this board to support something that is not ready for prime time yet. And quite frankly, it raises larger issues about this project, right? Because if it is so important that all of this be approved so that we can meet a deadline that the federal government has in terms of funding, what does it say about how this project is being managed that we are on the brink of actually losing and missing a deadline? I mean, what is happening here doesn't really create a great deal of confidence. And I would question what exactly is going on with this project. I mean, when did we know that this deadline was looming? And if we knew that this deadline was looming for quite some time, why is it that we didn't finish a protocol prior to bringing it to the board for approval? I don't know who can answer that. Maybe Ms. Gillette can answer that through the chair.
Supervisor, thank you for the question. So combined staffs have been working on an oversight protocol for some time. You, sitting as the TA, reviewed a protocol that was the existing protocol has largely been led by TA staff. And at the time that the protocol was originally conceived, it was considered adequate. Between then and today, over the past, beginning in April, there has been an additional level of review provided from the industry, the American Public Transit Agency, of a particular aspect of the early investment strategy of high-speed rail. And that report has surfaced as additional information in the intervening time, and that has caused us to want to address the oversight protocol and strengthen it.
If I may, through the chair, what is the date of that report?
July 4th.
July 4th. So information arose between July 4th and now. Right. That, and was there an effort to actually resolve the issues that were raised in that report between that time and today?
There is. I believe Caltrain is taking steps to implement the recommendations of the report. However, on further review by city staff, it has been our opinion that that could have further implications on the general fund, and therefore we need to look at the protocol.
Can I ask you specifically what kinds of issues were raised in that July report that could have implications on the general fund?
Well, Supervisor, I have a copy. I could distribute the report.
Sure. I want to know what we're talking about.
Sure.
And when you say implications on the general fund, how much are we talking about? What's the potential hit on the general fund?
Supervisor, we don't know the potential impact of the hit on the general fund, which is why we would like an oversight protocol that will allow us to have oversight over the project to understand the implications of those costs.
But see, that makes it even scarier, because you're asking us to vote for a resolution that actually takes out any reference to a protocol that is not yet adequate. And the reason it's not adequate is because we don't know the implications on the potential hit on the general fund. I mean, it just seems like the more we learn about this, the more problematic it becomes. But thank you for the report.
Thank you, Supervisor.
Thank you, Supervisor Campos. Supervisor Cohen.
Thank you very much. Colleagues, I think I may have a little resolution to some of the concerns that we are discussing. First of all, I'm this body's representative at the JPB, the Joint Powers Board, and has been a part of this conversation for quite some time. I've also been in touch with Ben Rosenfeld, who has informed me that he believes that 1 week is not enough time for him to review the oversight measures that we are discussing. The amendments that I actually introduced would allow us to continue the negotiations, to allow us to meet the deadline, but still keep the creation and the agreement of the oversight protocols, that conversation open. And I think that that's pretty significant and important. So again, the reason why I made a motion for us to remove the first whereas clause is just so that we will have that flexibility to continue to move forward with this project, but not sacrifice the important oversight controls that we need to keep in place. Also, if I'm not mistaken, I believe we also had an opportunity to discuss this discussion at the TA earlier this month. I'd like to give TA staff an opportunity to come up and talk on this matter. Thank you. Go. Maria.
Supervisors Anna Lafort with the Transportation Authority. We would recommend advancing the supplemental MOU at this time. It would commit San Francisco to an additional $20 million above the $60 million that we have already secured. Of the $20 million, $3.9 million has been identified from the Prop K sales tax, and the remaining funds are eligible for the new revenue measure that is proposed for the ballot in November, or there could be other potential revenues that could be identified going forward if that measure is not successful in November. But we would certainly support advancing this, the MOU, and as amended, and to allow for additional conversation about the oversight protocol. It does not mean that that protocol will not advance. It absolutely will advance, but it would allow for more conversation about what is the most appropriate level of oversight for San Francisco and for the other partners as well.
Thank you. Supervisor Peskin.
Thank you, Madam President. First of all, I was kind of taken a little bit by surprise relative to the amendments that were offered earlier with regard to the removal of the whereas clauses in and around the protocol, which has been the subject of this conversation. A representation was made by our colleague who serves on the Joint Powers Board relative to a statement made by allegedly made by the controller relative to whether or not this could be resolved on or before next Monday, when we may have a special board meeting. And I would like to ask Mr. Riedstrom, who is the controller's representative, whether or not that is the position of the controller's office.
Todd Riedstrom, Deputy Controller. My remarks earlier, Supervisor Peskin, through the President, was that we'd be happy to work with the Department to draft some language that addressed appropriate oversight control, and that would be a relatively quick process if we used what we had recently done for the Cost Review Committee, for example, for the Transbay project, as well as the other measures we took there. So to the degree it's a revision to legislation relatively quickly, and patterned after that, we could do that quickly. So I'm not familiar with anything further than that.
So I think potentially we could hear this item later on in the agenda, and that language can be brought back to our attention so that we can move this item out today and we will not need to continue it. That's what it sounds like.
Madam President, insofar as I still have the floor, Mr. Riedstrom, do you believe, well, actually, it doesn't really matter what you believe because the protocol has to be agreed to by multiple parties, but do you believe that you can suggest and that we can condition the passage of this resolution on language that you can provide before the end of this meeting?
I need time to check back with the office. I can't do it right here at my computer, but I'd have to check back.
Okay, so Madam President and colleagues, I believe that our fundamental responsibility and duty is to the general fund of the City and County of San Francisco. I in no way want to delay this project. I understand that time is of the essence, and God forbid Donald Trump may become the next President of the United States and all of the representations of the Obama administration may cease. Having said that, I would either propose that if language is forthcoming, if staff of Caltrain, the San Francisco County Transportation Authority, and the Mayor's Office are willing to have us predicate our approval on that protocol language, that we could approve it today. Should that not happen, I would suggest that this item be continued to our special meeting, which I believe will happen next Monday, but I think that it would be irresponsible for us not to meet our fundamental duty to protect the general fund, and I know that Supervisor Farrell shares my sentiment as chair of the Budget Committee of this Board of Supervisors.
Through the chair.
Supervisor Campos, and before I recognize Supervisor Campos, I think what I would suggest is that we finish this item later on in the agenda to give the Controller's Office time to provide us with language to make sure that we have a clear understanding of what can be proposed, and we can make our decision at that time whether or not that is agreeable to move this forward, or it's preferred to continue it to the potential special meeting that we are scheduling for Monday. Supervisor Campos.
Thank you. I think that a couple of points that I want to make. One is the question of, I think that before I am comfortable voting for anything, I do want to have more information on what the potential hit to the general fund is. I understand that we may not have a number, but what is the range that we're talking about? Are we talking about millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions? I think that we need to have that information. And then just going through this report, just a couple of things that stand out. If you look at page 3, and I think that copies have been made, this is what this report says. In the view of the panel, the probability of meeting the October implementation schedule is doubtful. And then it says on page 3 also, Caltrain oversight and TASI engagement needs to be strengthened and operational training needs to be expedited. I don't know what that means, but to the extent that there is a need to strengthen oversight that this panel finds, I want to know what that means. And I'm all for moving something forward, but not if we don't have a full assessment of what the potential hit on the general fund is, in light of the fact that we have a panel of experts that's actually calling into question the management and oversight of this project. So that's very troubling to me. Thank you.
Thank you. Supervisor Peskin?
So, Madam President, I just want to reiterate, if the protocols come back before this board for our review and approval, that would be one way to handle this matter.
Okay, thank you. So at this time, we are going to give the Controller's Office time to work on the language to propose to us. We're going to continue with our agenda. We have